I made a few batches so you could see the common mistakes that you can make and how they show up once you've baked the cookie off. So let's look at the difference between underfolding and overfolding. Do you remember when we were discussing about the difference between overfolding and underfolding, and how when you underfold, you don't quite fold as much, you don't get as flat a cookie, you kind of get a little hat or a bump on top of the cookie. Let me show you this row here. See these 4 cookies here? These are underfolded. They've got like a little hat on top, and later on when we go and sandwich them and box them up nicely next to each other, this little top here is going to poke the cookie next to it. So these are slightly underfolded. The foot, which is the crinkly edge around the bottom of the cookie, is much higher when you underfold. There's a lot more air in the batter because you haven't folded all the air out. So I want to show you another quick variation. Do you see these 3 here? How they look a little bit oblong and a little funny here. They're sort of sealed at the bottom and don't have an even foot. When you hold your pastry bag on a bias or you're too close to the paper, you're going to get this sort of funny shape. When you're making macarons, it's nice to have them all look nice and perfect and even. It's not really a very rustic sort of operation. These little things really help you to get sort of the perfect macaron each time. These all over here have a nice sized foot. It's just a little bit apart from the cookie here. It's got a nice size and they baked up quite nicely. This row of macarons here were piped too thick. Do you remember when I showed you how to pipe and then I kind of squeezed and came up as I squeezed and I got too much batter? These are a little bit thick, and you'll notice here that this one got dimpled and broke. That's because there was too much batter in there. It was too heavy and it didn't bake up properly, so they're kind of raw on the inside. Let me show you now what happens when you overfold. This tray came from a really overfolded batch. And that means that we folded so much that we took most of the air out of the batter. When you fold all the air out of the batter, you end up with something very runny, and there's no air left in the cookie so that it can lift up and dry on the inside later and form a nice foot. So here's what we've got here. They're kind of wrinkly on top, and they're all misshapen, and they've got a really uneven, very, very thin foot. This one's a classic example of overfolding. There's nothing really that can make these cookies lift up in the oven other than those little pockets of air that you leave in there by not overfolding. So when you overfold, you get a very soupy kind of batter, and when they go into the oven, there's not much lift that can happen. So they stay very small and short, and they tend to seal up here in some areas and not form a foot at all. They also look a little bit lumpy here, again, because they don't bake up evenly. So you can see here, this is overfolding. If this is happening to you, next time you make the macaron, fold a little bit less. So I've got a third pan here to show you what else can happen. So here we go. These right here are burnt. They look really great. They've got a little bit of a hat on top, so they're a little underfolded, and they've got a nice foot, but the oven was just a little too hot. The other way that you can tell that your oven's too hot is if sometimes your macarons dome up and crack. That means your oven's much too hot, and I would use it at a much lower temperature. If you have a convection oven at home, always use it about 40 degrees lower than the recipe calls for. Whether you're making macaron or a cake, you need to sort of remove some of the heat that's being circulated around by the fan in the convection oven by lowering the temperature a bit. Also, older ovens tend to be hotter. They're darker on the inside and things brown more quickly. So just play with your oven a little bit. Don't worry about being exact with the temperature. I want you to just work with what you have. So I'd never throw these away even if they're not perfect. I'm going to pick the prettiest ones and fill them with some buttercream, and then the rest of them I would make a macaron ice cream cake with. So, peel them off the paper, put a little parchment paper down on a pie pan or a cake pan on the very bottom, press all these macarons in there, pour some ice cream over that and freeze it, and the next day flip it over, unmold it, and you've got this really cool kind of meringue crisp crust around the ice cream, and it's really delicious. And if you have any salted caramel left over, pour that over at the same time, and it's not so bad. So never throw them away. Don't despair. This recipe just makes one cookie sheet, so if you want to do a couple practice runs over a couple of hours on a Saturday, not a big deal, but this is what to look out for. Thank you for taking the time to make macarons with me. I hope you learned that these are not that difficult to make, that with really simple technique and paying attention to the ribbon and your piping technique, you can easily make macarons on your own at home. I look forward to seeing you again, and happy macaron making. Goodbye.